In the last episode, we covered Daenerys' House of the Undying vision for the first time with the understanding that there are likely others, frozen, undying, in the wall. Once you know that, George is laying it on incredibly thick. There are sounds within the wall. He describes them as other sounds, as though someone is trying to get out. When he describes the voices of the Undying, multiple times he says other voices, and a myriad of other voices. The Undying make other sounds. They speak with other voices. There are sounds in the wall like someone is trying to get out, and they are all frozen around an icy blue corrupt heart, which Daenerys cannot leave until she destroys. She gets a vision of her Misa moment where the slaves are reaching out as though she is their mother, and she has freed them. Then they turn into the others. They turn into the Undying because she has to free the others who are also slaves. But it's creepy and scary, and her heart stops beating along with the heart of winter because she will die in the process. But believe it or not, I am actually, I think, going to go a little farther than just saying Daenerys saw a vision of the others trapped there in the House of the Undying. I think the House of the Undying themselves, are literally the others who are inside the wall right now. They are literally frozen there. The reason that the Undying look dead and frozen is because they are literally currently stuck in the wall, undying. Now, you may have a few questions, like, what? How? I thought we knew what the Undying were already. George told us what the Undying were. They're these warlocks in Qarth who drink all of the shade of the evening and turn blue. No. I actually believe that George has hidden these things by leading us to some assumptions about the Undying, because we see them early in the books. It's in this mystical place like Qarth, and we just kind of make certain assumptions that are actually leading us down the wrong path. Now, in order to understand the case I'm making, we're going to have to take a look at what the different types of magic that we're exposed to are called in A Song of Ice and Fire. First of all, we have the green men and the old Age of Heroes kings like Garth the Green, who seemed to be able to do green magic. Then we have blood magic, which seems to be very powerful and the source of much of the magic in the world today. Things like sacrificing blood to these heart trees to keep the wall going could be considered blood magic. Things that Melisandre does with King's Blood is blood magic. But the other type of Melisandre magic that she likes to do is shadow binding. That's the type of magic that we're going to have to talk about today. The Eastern shadow binders. So let's talk a little bit about the only example that we have for sure seen of shadow binding. Melisandre does a magic spell on Stannis while sleeping with him to make a shadow that she births that goes forth into the physical world and then does things. But it is a physical shadow of Stannis who is only out there as he sleeps. So when Stannis sleeps, he has a dream of being this shadow. He dreams that he killed Renly. So he is sleeping there, but physically experiencing what this shadow experiences. Therefore, essentially, his soul is bound in this shadow, and it is being used for magic. This is directly a shadow of Stannis Baratheon out there in the world doing something else as he sleeps. It literally directly contains a piece of the power of his life force. It is a shadow bound. It is like soul trapping in the Elder Scrolls, right? If you need to get a powerful weapon, you trap someone's soul in it. If you need to do magic, you need to trap a soul or bind a shadow. Shadow binding. The next thing that we need to look at is the warlocks of Qarth. They are specifically called warlocks. Now, the use of the word warlocks makes sense if you take the fact that warlocks are usually thought to be types of wizards who have made a deal with some greater power source for their power. Generally a deal with the devil, but they have made some sort of deal, some sort of bargain with a power source to give them magic. And that sounds exactly like what's going on in the House of the Undying if you think that it is powered by the spirits, the magic source, the very incredibly powerful magic source that seems to be worldwide, that is centered around the wall and the interior of the wall. Melisandre knows that it is a magic source that is worldwide. She calls it one of the hinges of the world. There is incredible magical power coming from this world tree-like organism within the wall, and that is what is being tapped into by the Undying in Qarth. Specifically, they are tapping into the shadows of the forever trapped, undying beings who are in the wall, powering the magic source. And what is the house of the Undying? What is the deal that they have made with these beings who are a powerful magical source? Well, they've given them a home. It is the house of the Undying. When Daenerys goes in, she sees the shadows sitting in a long stone hall at dinner. Why is this a deal that they would agree to and give the Qartheen magical powers because of it? Why would the others in the wall allow their shadows to be bound in this way by the Qartheen if all they're doing is using it for the Warlock's power and keeping the Undying trapped there? Well, it seems to me that they gain two very obvious benefits from being shadowbound and allowing the Warlocks to gain this access to their power. Because the thing is, these beings are trapped where they are. They didn't have a choice in the first place. They are a magical power source whether they like it or not. So, when Jaime is in a terrible situation, how does he describe it? He describes what he did when he didn't want to be in the throne room as the bodies were being burned, or outside of the throne room as Mad King things were going on in the bedroom. Jaime says he went away inside himself, right? You stand there physically, but mentally you go somewhere else. It is a trauma response. So, the trauma of being frozen in the wall forever with nowhere to go, a good response is to allow your shadow to be bound to a house somewhere else where you can go away inside. These beings who are trapped in the wall are physically going away from their physical body and experiencing a version of life as the shadow in the House of the Undying. The same way Stannis, as he is asleep, is dreaming of killing Renly. It is much better than being waking and sleeping, frozen in an ice wall forever, to at least be able to have a dream form where you are out there experiencing literally anything else, even if it is being trapped in this long, gloomy House of the Undying hall in a spirit form while the warlocks sap power off of you to do magic tricks. That's why the spirits of the others are living in the House of the Undying. They are shadow-bound. The wall is a magic power source. The Qartheen warlocks have made a deal with some of the beings who are the battery of that power source, and they have shadow-bound their figures in the House of the Undying. The other thing that the others would obviously get from allowing themselves to be trapped in the House of the Undying in shadow form, besides, a break from being stuck in the wall, is the fact that they eventually use that as an outlet to reach out to Daenerys. It is a way to communicate to the outside world when eventually someone powerful enough to help comes along. That way you can reach out to them, and that's exactly what they do. Eventually, when Daenerys comes, they reach out to her. But do we have any proof that the magic and the power of the wall would be directly related to the power and the magic of the House of the Undying? I actually think that we do. Besides all of the obvious, icy blue heart, frozen blue figures, others symbolism, others voices, other sounds, besides all of that, we get the direct reference to the fact that the Warlock's magic was getting weaker. Xaro says that they are nothing compared to the Warlocks that there used to be, and you know why that's happening? Because the Wall's magic is getting weaker. The power source of the Wall has been weakening for hundreds of years, as we have discussed early in this series. The blood sacrifices of the First Night babies were stopped by Queen Alysanne. The Wall's power is weakening. That is why the others are able to start amassing their power beyond the Wall, and they're getting ready to try and bring it down. The House of the Undying's magic got weaker in recent generations, right along with the Wall and the Night's Watch getting weaker and dwindling in numbers, because there's not as much blood sacrifice going into the Wall right now as there was before. That's why the Qartheen magic started to get weaker. It only got strong again when magic started getting strong again with the return of Daenerys' dragons. So there is a resurgence of magic going on, but as the Wall and as the Night's Watch was getting weaker, and as the blood sacrifices to the Wall were dwindling, thanks to the actions probably of Bloodraven, but for sure of Queen Alysanne, thanks to all of that, the magic was getting weaker, and we see the exact same thing in the House of the Undying. That's the reason that Zaro doesn't believe that they have anything other than magic tricks. He is dismissive of them, and the House of the Undying is falling into disrepair because the power source of the Undying is not what it was hundreds of years ago, and what it was for thousands of years as they were trapped there, being fully fed all of this blood sacrifice. The magic is weaker, and that tracks with what we see if the House of the Undying was tapping into the Wall the entire time. So, okay, shadow binding is a type of magic that you could do. The binding of shadows within the Wall and the term warlocks, when put together with the House of the Undying, kind of makes sense, right? The magic deal that they made was giving the Undying a house, but the warlocks themselves do not refer to themselves as the Undying. The Undying are their power source. They live at the House of the Undying because it makes them magically powerful. But they, the warlocks themselves, are not the Undying. But okay, even if you want to take the little red herring that George is throwing out there that is leading so many people to believe that the Undying are just warlocks who have gone very far down their path of magic and drank so much shade of the evening that they have turned completely blue, I'm going to say why I don't think that's the case, and I will explain what I think shade of the evening actually is. So, to understand what shade of the evening is, I believe, we need to understand what the actual magic source is that they're tapping into, which is these people who are consciousness tied to the weirwoods, right? If they are strapped to these weirwoods and a spirit is pulled from the wood, a shadow emerged from the dark of the wood, if that is what the others are, and these spirits who are strapped to the weirwoods, stuck frozen around the heart of winter, the corrupt icy blue heart, they are weirwood magic spirits on some level. So it makes sense then that the power source of the drink that the Undying like to drink is a shadow weirwood. It works the same. Let's take a look at the physical description. It is a black tree with black bark and blue leaves. Why is it black with blue leaves? A weirwood is white with red leaves, and I believe, and I'm going to go into this in a later episode in this series, I believe the reason that weirwoods have red leaves like human hands is because their source of power is blood, and there are people, human spirits, within them, right? So, if you have a tree with a blood source of power, you're going to have red leaves. If you have a magic source that is a shadow of that tree, where the power is these icy blue shadows, these shadow-bound blue figures, you would have a black bark, shadow of the white bark, and the power source colors the leaves, blue leaves. Instead of blood magic, you have the shadow-bound, blue shadow weirwood magic that is coming from this tree that is made into Shade of the Evening. Shade of the Evening is basically a shadow weirwood paste. It is just like the weirwood paste that we see Bran drink, except for it is blue. The blue, shadowy version of it, because the power that the House of the Undying is tapping into is a blue, magically bound shadow spirit, a shadow of the weirwood magic going on within the Wall, and that's why it's manifesting in the forms it's manifesting in Qarth. This explains the Qartheen magic setup, if they're all tapping into the Wall the way that you would expect a group of warlocks would do. Now, I don't think we have any proof that the assumption that many people make could even happen. Do we ever have any proof that someone could drink enough Shade of the Evening to turn themselves entirely blue and become one of these Undying ones? I don't think that we do, and I don't really know that I've ever even heard it implied. I think that's just what people directly assumed when we see these wizards or these warlocks drinking blue wine, their lips turn blue, and then the most powerful figures in their order appear to be fully blue and spirit form. It's an easy assumption to make that, oh, you drink enough of the shade of the evening, you eventually become this. But we're never told that. George is doing a sneaky, like he loves to do so much. He has put these clues right out there, but then never actually given us the link between them and let us just assume ourselves that, yep, you drink the thing, your lips turn blue. Obviously, if you drink enough of it, you turn completely blue. That's not the case. So, is this definitive? Can I say I can prove without a doubt that this is what's going on at the House of the Undying? No, I cannot. George doesn't want us to be able to prove without a doubt that these are the others in the wall until after. In hindsight, it will be obvious. When this series is finished, you will go back and you will be able to read and you will go, oh my god, they were shadow binding the others, the Undying ones, the entire time. The entire story is going to be about dealing with the Undying ones. That's why Daenerys had to go to the House of the Undying and get a vision of her rescuing them. So that's what George is doing. He is obviously hiding all of this very well. He is telling us a story with a couple of missing pieces that seem so obvious, we just straight up fill in the blanks ourselves, connecting the warlocks and their drinking of shade of the evening to eventually turning into the Undying ones is a connection that we make. The assumption that the Carthene magic and its power source must be some far-off eastern thing that is going to be wholly unrelated to Westeros is a logical assumption that is perfectly well set up, but not actually ever said, and George is doing that on purpose. The assumptions that you had coming into these videos about what was going on with Daenerys in the House of the Undying make complete sense. I had the same ones for a long time. I didn't get any of this until I realized what's going on inside the wall, and then went back and read the House of the Undying vision. So no, it doesn't really prove that that is what's going on inside the wall on its own when I point out the weird similarities to what I am suggesting with Daenerys' vision. But if you read the vision in hindsight, assuming that that is true, I couldn't write a vision that is more hinting towards what's going on. Think about it. If you had to write a vision sequence where there are undying icy people trapped around heart trees frozen in the wall, could you lay it on heavier and still hide it than what George is doing with this vision? I think the answer is no. The House of the Undying is perfectly, directly, in George Martin foreshadowing terms, setting up the fact that there are undying others as a giant magical power source within the wall. The warlocks were doing warlock things and made a deal in some or another fashion, or have bound them. I don't know if it's a deal favorable to these undying ones. I think perhaps they could be using it to communicate with the outside world and potentially eventually knew that they could use it to communicate with someone like Daenerys to free them, but in any case, that seems to be what is going on there. It also certainly does remove the criticism about how Daenerys' early story is not related to Westeros at all, when you look back in hindsight and realize the House of the Undying and all of the stuff that was happening around it were directly related to the wall and the heart of the problem that all of the characters are working towards eventually fixing. So, what do we do with the fact that Daenerys collapsed the House of the Undying and, in theory, the shadows within were destroyed when she killed them all? Well, if they are being used as a magical power source within the wall and are sick of it, surely they don't want the House of the Undying and whatever deal they made to go on either. They need to get rid of that before the wall comes down. It's fine while the wall is up and they're permanently trapped there, but once they are released from the wall, they certainly don't want to be shadowbound either. So sort of like a Horcrux, Daenerys needed to take out the House of the Undying on her way to freeing these undying ones within the wall. It was important to the story the whole time, and George wasn't telling us that. He was letting us think it's completely unrelated, but everything Daenerys is doing, from the House of the Undying, to the freeing of slaves, to the crucified children as mile markers, it's all building up to have him go, I told you it was important the whole time, everyone. All of it matters, every bit. That's what he's trying to do with Daenerys' story. The House of the Undying is part of that. Now, I think that entire idea is reasonably well supported by the text, at least in the terms that if it were to turn out to be true, we would look back at everything that George wrote and go, yep, that makes sense, I can see what he was doing here. But are you ready for something that is completely unfounded, personal speculation, additional tinfoil, if you will? I have a possible explanation for the pact that the Warlocks could have made, because there is Night King and Night Fort symbolism all throughout the House of the Undying. There are sounds in the wall that remind Daenerys of rats, the rat cook in the wall. The same way when Bran hears sounds in the wall of the Night Fort, it's the rats, because of the rat cook. The rats in the wall symbolism, the other sounds in the wall, when we eventually find out there are others near the Night Fort in the wall, that will all make sense, right? All of this, it's a gloomy, giant stone hall where a figure who very clearly could represent the Night's King and his corpse queen sitting across the table from each other, especially if they are trapped there under the Night Fort forever undying, it will make perfect sense that the Night's King and Queen are the two figures that Daenerys sits down next to in the House of the Undying. The Night Fort could be the House of the Undying in so many symbolic ways, because the deal that they made was some Carthene warlock met with the Night's King and made some pact, and then when the Night's King was defeated and punished, and the wall was down, and they took that opportunity to lock him and his sworn brothers up and turn them into others and make them a part of the wall's power source the way they did when they originally built the wall. I think that's probably what happened, right? They could have taken all of them and as punishment nailed them to the big world tree at the Night Fort where the wall was temporarily down and turned them into others the same way that we see the Night's King in the show turned into a merged consciousness with these weirwoods somehow. And then the pact that he had made with one of the warlocks, possibly while he was trying to bring down the wall, he had the help of a warlock from Qarth? Who knows? In any case, the pact that he could have made with them, or some connection, some communication between the original Night's King and the OG Warlock of Qarth, could be the reason the House of the Undying exists there, and why it has so many clear Night Fort parallels. This would mean that the figures that Daenerys sees and sits down to feast with would be the Night's King and his sworn brothers who rebelled against the old ways and were nailed to these trees and turned to others near the Night Fort. They originally had an alliance with a warlock who was trying to help them, and he carries their shadows bound power to this day and is using it. And that would make sense then, in some way, if his actions, butterfly effect downwards for 8,000 years, lead to Daenerys going into the House of the Undying and seeing what she needs to do, being set on this path by these visions that eventually lead to freeing the Night's King and giving them death in the way that they want, so that they can go back into the Weirwoods and no longer be the Undying. A lot of additional tinfoil there at the end. I might just be writing fan fiction at this point. I don't know. But in any case, let me know what you think for the arguments I've made. Can you add any support? Can you add any contradictory statements that I may need to look further into? Let me know down in the comments below. We love a good question around here, and I will see you all with something else very soon.